رحم الله من قرأ سورة المباركة الفاتحة. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين. إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين. اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. الحمد لله. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله بارئ الخلائق الأجمعين باعث الأنبياء والمرسلين، ثم الصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء حبيب قلوبنا وشفيع ذنوبنا أبي القاسم محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. ثم الصلاة والسلام على أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين، لا سيما ولي الله الحجة ابن الحسن صاحب الأمر والزمان. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجه. روحي وأرواح العالمين له الفداء، ولعنة الله على أعدائهم وعلى منكري فضائلهم من الأولين والآخرين إلى قيام يوم الدين. آمين رب العالمين. أما بعد، قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم: اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. إن الله يرضى لرضاة فاطمة ويغضب لغضبها. صدق النبي وآمنا به. نوروا مجالسكم بذكر محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجه. أحبائي, to commemorate the third riwayah on the martyrdom of the Lady of Light, Sayyidati Nisa al-Alameen, Sayeda Fatima al-Zahra alayha salam. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Over the next three majalis, the idea and the goal is to shed light on the maqam of Sayyidati Nisa al-Alameen, and to shed light on the madlumiyyah of Sayyidati Nisa al-Alameen. But you find that historians are unanimous on the fact that upon the martyrdom of the Holy Prophet of Islam, Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad wa ajil farajah, Sayeda Fatima al-Zahra went into Masjid al-Nabawi and she delivered the sermon, the khutbah fadakiyyah, a khutbah azim, a sermon which is grand not only in terms of its contents, but from every possible perspective. In terms of the content from a deen perspective, from a theological, from a philosophical, but from a grammatical perspective as well. For indeed, this khutbah of Sayyidat Nisa al-Alameen in essence is a reflection of the peak of eloquence. For you find that in this khutbah fadakiyyah which Sayyidat Nisa al-Alameen delivered in Masjid al-Nabawi, a khutbah which is narrated by both the Amma and the Khassa, you find that Sayyidat Nisa al-Alameen in Masjidun Nabawi, surrounded by women of Bani Hashim. And the curtain is drawn in the masjid to divide between her and the men. And from behind this curtain, being surrounded with this circle of the women from Bani Hashim, Sayyidat Nisa al-Alameen goes on to deliver this khutbah fadakiyya. And within this khutbah, Sayeda Fatima al-Zahra makes one statement, and within this statement there are chapters and chapters and chapters of ma'rifah that can be deduced. She stood in Masjidun Nabawi, and as she addressed the Ansar and the Muhajirin, she says to them, وَاِعْلَمُوا أَنِّي فَاطِمَةٌ. Allah. Sayyida Zahra declares, Sayyida Zahra states, O people, اعلموا أني Fatima, know that I am Fatima. What was Sayyida Fatima al-Zahra pointing out to through this statement? When she said, know that I am Fatima, what did she mean? Did the people from the Ansar and the Muhajirin not know that Sayyidah Fatima al-Zahra by lineage is the daughter of Rasulullah? Ashraful Anbiya is her father, and Sayyidah Khadijah al-Kubra, the first woman to become Muslim and the first woman to pray Salat behind Rasulullah, is her mother. Were the people not aware that Sayyidah Zahra is the daughter of Rasulullah and Sayyidah Khadijah al-Kubra Ummul Mu'minin alayha salam? La, the people from the Ansar and the Muhajirin, all of them knew that Sayyidah Fatima al-Zahra is the daughter of Rasulullah. So, if the people were aware that from a lineage, the perspective of a lineage, that she is the daughter of Rasulullah, there was no need for this type of an introduction. It would not make sense for Sayyidah Zahra to say, "I'lamu anni Fatima," know that I am Fatima, because the people knew that she's the daughter of Rasulullah. What did Sayyidah Fatima al-Zahra mean behind this? Sayyidati Nisa al-Alameen, in this khutbah, when she says, "I'lamu anni Fatima," know that I am Fatima, meaning from here have ma'rifah of the status of Fatima. When Sayyidat Nisa al-Alameen walked into the masjid and she delivered this khutbah azima, and she says, "I'lamu anni Fatima," know that I am Fatima, ya'ni the words that I am going to deliver in this khutbah, pay attention to them very well. Understand the depths of the words that I'm going to say, and the depth of the words in my khutbah. You should know, pay attention when I speak. And the only manner in which this attention is going to be gained is if you know who I am. Understand who the speaker of this khutbah is. Understand the maqam, have ma'rifah of the one delivering this khutbah. Know when Sayyidah Fatima al-Zahra comes into the masjid to deliver a khutbah, it ain't a joke. This is not a normal sermon by a normal believer, leave normal human being. Who is talking? Who has come to the masjid? Who has been forced to come to the masjid in this manner? What circumstances forced her to come into the masjid in this manner? Who is Fatima? I'lamu anni Fatima. Know who I am. From a second perspective, the words of Sayyidat Nisa al-Alameen, we are able to deduce. And I use these words very carefully. And there is backing for this when she says, "I'lamu anni Fatima." I'lamu, derivative from the verb alima, yani seek knowledge, gain knowledge, know who I am. The wujub, obligation of seeking ma'rifah of Sayeda Fatima al-Zahra alayha salam. اعلموا أني فاطمة. Know that I am Fatima. طيب. In this khutbah, Sayeda Fatima al-Zahra is calling out to the people. Seek my ma'rifah. Understand who I am. Know what my status is. And from here you will understand the gravity of my coming into the mosque and the gravity of this sermon that I deliver. For we embark, or we attempt to embark on this journey of seeking ma'rifah of Sayeda Fatima al-Zahra alayha salam to the extent that is possible. And this is nothing but a drop of a drop within a grand ocean. For Sayeda Fatima al-Zahra and her maqamat, what is her status such that she declared in the masjid, know who I am. Hadith is Sharif, which is narrated by both the Amma as well as the Khassa in regards to the status of Sayeda Zahra. There is one aspect that I would like to discuss tonight. There was one aspect of the maqam of Sayeda Fatima al-Zahra alayha salam that we spoke during the second Fatimiyyah, in that in the same manner that Rasulullah is rahmatan lil alameen, Sayyidat Nisa il alameen is also rahmatan lil alameen. For tonight, the maqam of Sayeda Fatima al-Zahra alayha salam, شوفوا أحبائي hadith al-Sharif, which is narrated by both the Amma as well as the Khassa. And then I read this hadith from the books of the Mukhalifin لإتمام الحجة, for the hujjah and the proof to be of the highest of calibers when it comes to binding proof. Not caliber in terms of authenticity or what we hold as credibility of masadir, but masadir, not hadith, but for the case to be foolproof, as we would say. Hadith al-Sharif in regards to the maqam of Sayyidat Nisa al-Alameen from the books of the Mukhalifin, where the Holy Prophet of Islam sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad wa ajjal farajah, stated, Inna Allah yaghdab li ghadabi Fatima wa yarda li ridaha. Indeed, or verily, inna adawat al-ta'akid, as they say in the Arabic grammar, the particle inna, alif with a kasra, noon with a shadda, fatha, inna. Inna Allah, yani indeed, for sure, without doubt, verily, attestation of a fact. Inna Allah yaghdab li ghadabi Fatima. Indeed, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is angered with the anger of Fatima. وَيَرْضَى لِرِضَاهَا, and the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is embedded in the pleasure of Sayyidah Fatima al-Zahra. Allah is angered with the anger of Fatima, and Allah is pleased with the pleasure of Fatima. Meaning that whomsoever Sayyidah Fatima al-Zahra is pleased with them, Allah is pleased with them. Whomsoever Sayyidah Fatima al-Zahra is angered with, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is angered with them. For narrating the hadith is one thing. Understanding the implications of the hadith is another thing. But before we enter into this, real quick, even from the books of the Mukhalifin, you find this hadith is narrated in Mustadrak al-Sahihain. Mustadrak al-Sahihain, which is the, you could say, commentary on Bukhari and Sahih, which was authored by Al-Hakim al-Nishaburi. For in his Mustadrak al-Sahihain, he puts in his footnote that this hadith is a hadith sahih, according to their criterias of ilmul hadith or rijal. And then you also have other scholars from the Mukhalifin, such as Al-Haythami in Majma'u Zawaid, who states Hadithun Hasanun, that the hadith, the sanad of the hadith is Hasan, a grade lower than Sahih, but it still comes under the parameters of a hadith which is accepted, in which yani the authenticity cannot be disputed. And you have the same hadith with the same sanad which is narrated by a Tabarani, same sanad which Al-Haythami declares to be Hasanun. And the difference between Hasan and Sahih we have mentioned in majalis in the past, but sufficient it is for us to say that according to both of these or all three of these scholars, hadith yani authentic, credible, and taken as a hujjah. Allah is angered with the anger of Fatima, and Allah is pleased with the pleasure of Fatima. The anger of Allah is the anger of Fatima. The anger of Fatima is the anger of Allah Azza wa Jal. From here we understand that the emotions that are portrayed by Sayeda Fatima al-Zahra are not any ordinary emotions of happiness or sadness that any other human being would experience. But the maqam of Sayeda Fatima al-Zahra is such that the emotions of Sayeda Fatima al-Zahra dictate whether a person's destiny is in Jannah or in Jahannam. Allahu Akbar. Who is this daughter, Sayeda? Who is this daughter of Rasulullah, Sayeda Fatima al-Zahra? The respect and the love that is accorded to Sayeda Fatima al-Zahra is not only restricted or accorded on the fact that she is the daughter of the Prophet. La! There is a maqam much higher than this. Who is this Zahra? Her emotions, ahibai, these are words that have the highest of weights or the heaviest of weights attached to them. The emotions of Sayyida Fatima al-Zahra dictate destiny in Jannah or Jahannam. The pleasure of Sayyida Fatima al-Zahra dictates Jannah. The anger of Sayyida Zahra dictates Jahannam. If you understand this, narrating a hadith is one thing, as we said, understanding the hadith is another thing. For one, that we have established is that the anger of Fatima alayha salam is the anger of Allah. The pleasure of Sayyidah Fatima al-Zahra is the pleasure of Allah. If this is something that is understood, then the next step when it comes to understanding the hadith is that we actually refer back to the Quran. And we now ask ourselves, what are the implications of reaping the anger of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran talks about numerous categories of people who sought the anger of Allah, who earned the anger and the wrath of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They reap the anger of Allah azza wa jal, and there were consequences for them. For the bahath over here from a Quranic perspective is that what are the implications or what are the consequences of people who seek the anger of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? And the understanding is that the anger of Fatima alayha salam is the anger of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Meaning that the same implications that are applicable for people who show the anger of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, those same implications are applicable on those people who sought the anger of Sayeda Fatima al-Zahra. Yani, there is no difference between the anger of Allah or the anger of Fatima. The anger of Fatima is the anger of Allah. The anger of Allah is the anger of Fatima alayha salam. And regardless of these two, synonyms you can say. And if you understand this, then let us see the destiny and the consequences of those who sought the anger of Allah. And this is one aspect of tafsir of the Quran through which you understand the azama of Ahlul Bayt. Inta Habibi, you know from the hadith of Rasulullah, Inna Allah yarda li ridati Fatima wa yaghdab li ghadabiha. The anger of Fatima is the anger of Allah. Which means every time you read a verse in the Quran that comes across verses of the anger of Allah, know that this is a direct reference and is applicable to the anger of Fatima alayha salam within the Quran. Shufu ahibai. First verse within the Quran, the implications of those who sought the anger of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Surah Al-A'raf, verse number 152. Entum ahibai, follow this within the Quran. Surah Al-A'raf, verse number 152. In this verse, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks about those who deserved the anger of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala when they decided from the nation of Nabi Musa alayhi salam, when they decided to worship the golden calf. They earned and they sought the wrath and the anger of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Tayyib, they sought the anger of Allah. Look at what the verse says. إِنَّ الَّذِينَ اتَّخَذُوا الْعِجْلَ سَيَنَالُهُمْ غَضَبٌ مِّنْ رَبِّهِمْ. And for those who worshipped the calf, then upon them is the anger of Allah. So now look at the different reasons or the different causes that lead to a person seeking the anger of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. One of them is worshipping the calf, disobeying the Prophet of your time. The second one is disobeying or angering Sayeda Fatima. For angering Sayeda Fatima, the anger of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, what causes the anger of Allah has multiple causes. One of them is the anger of Sayeda Fatima. For what is the consequences of those who sought the anger of Allah Azza wa Jal? سَيَنَالُهُمْ غَضَبٌ مِّن رَبِّهِمْ. The consequence of the ghadab of Allah, the anger of Allah. وَذِلَّةٌ فِي الْحَيَاةِ الدُّنْيَا. وَذِلَّةٌ فِي الْحَيَاةِ الدُّنْيَا. For those who sought the anger of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who reaped the anger of Allah Azza wa Jal upon them. ذِلَّةٌ فِي الْحَيَاةِ الدُّنْيَا. Dhillah, disgrace in the life in this dunya. Whoever reaps the anger of Allah Azza wa Jal shall have a life of disgrace. And if you know that the anger of Sayeda Fatima is the anger of Allah, then understand through this verse of the Quran that anyone who seeks the anger of Sayeda Fatima al-Zahra will live a life of disgrace, as per the Quran. Tajruba, life experiences, people around us are the greatest manifestation of this verse. Antum shufu, within your own lives, those who despite knowing the truth about the oppression of Sayeda Fatima al-Zahra, turned a blind eye on the oppression and rather went on to defend the oppressors. Look at the disgraceful lifestyles that they live. Consequence of the anger of seeking the anger of Allah and the anger of Sayyidah Fatima al-Zahra is a disgrace in the dunya. And the manner in which death happens is even more disgraceful for such people. This is number one. Number two, according to the Quran, what are the implications of seeking the anger of Sayyidah Fatima al-Zahra? We refer back again to the Quran, Surah Al-Anfal, verse number 16. This verse of the Quran speaks about the state of certain people on the day of judgment. Look at what happens to them. وَمَنْ يُوَلِّهِمْ يَوْمَئِذٍ دُبُرَهُ إِلَّا متحرفا لقتال أو متحيزا إلى فئة فقد باء بغضب من الله. The point over here is the last part of the verse that speaks about the anger of Allah. فقد باء بغضب من الله. The verse speaks about the anger of Allah. وَمَأْوَاهُ جَهَنَّمُ وَبِئْسَ الْمَصِيرُ. For the one who seeks the anger of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the one upon whom the anger of Allah azza wa jal falls upon, then for him is Jahannam وَبِئْسَ الْمَصِيرُ. For him is hellfire in eternity and the worst of ends. The one who seeks the anger of Allah, the one upon whom the anger of Allah falls is Jahannam, and the anger of Fatima is the anger of Allah, meaning that if Fatima is angry with you, upon you is Jahannam wa bi'sal masir. Look at how grave these consequences become one by one. Number three, the consequences if the anger of Allah or the anger of Sayyidah Fatima al-Zahra falls upon a person. Look at this. Ayah of the Quran from Surah Maryam. Al-Afu from Surah Taha. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Surah Taha, verse number 81. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَيَحِلَّ عَلَيْكُمْ. I'm referring to the last part of the verse. فَيَحِلَّ عَلَيْكُمْ غَضَبِي وَمَنْ يَحْلِلْ عَلَيْهِ غَضَبِي فَقَدْ هَوَى. And for upon whom the anger of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala falls upon, then he has gone astray. Surely the one upon whom the anger of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala befalls can never be on the path of haqq, can never be on the path of truth. In the same way, the anger of Fatima is the anger of Allah, which means that if the anger of Fatima befalls upon a certain person or a certain community, then know that that person or that community are not on the path of haqq or on the path of truth. When the Rasulullah says, Inna Allah yarda li ridati Fatima wa yaghdab li ghadabiha, the words of Rasulullah, وَمَا يَنْتِقُ عَنِ الْهَوَىٰ إِنْ هُوَ إِلَّا وَحْيٌ يُوحَىٰ. The Prophet doesn't utter anything out of vain except that it is revelation from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. For when the Prophet makes a statement that the anger of Fatima is the anger of Allah, and the people and Muslimin read about the consequences of those who sought the anger of Allah in the Quran, then they should know, approach Sayyidati Nisa il Alameen with caution and know that she has been given this status by Allah, in that she is the ultimate manifestation of the pleasure and the anger of Allah. No, when you anger Fatima, you risk a life of disgrace. Know that when you anger Fatima, upon you is Jahannam wa bi'sal masir. Know that when you anger Fatima, you are on the path of falsehood. I from the Quran, Ahibai. If we understand the grave consequences of seeking the anger of Fatima, which in reality is a synonym for the anger of Allah, as per the Hadith al-Sharif narrated by Rasulullah in the books of the Amma and the Khasa. If this reality is understood, we ask ourselves, who are those individuals upon whom the anger of Sayeda Fatima al-Zahra alayhi salam fell upon? Who was she angry with in her life? وَخَاصَّةً upon the martyrdom of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Ahibai, see, when you claim to be a person of faith and a believer, meaning that you believe, and you only believe because you're convinced. And when you have belief and you have conviction, then our entire lives are built upon these sets of beliefs and these sets of convictions. We hold ourselves accountable to them. We live our lives by these principles. We propagate these principles and we defend them in a peaceful and in a non-violent manner, in a manner that is governed with ilm and with dalil. For if you understand the consequences of seeking the anger of Sayeda Fatima al-Zahra, which is the anger of Allah, who was Fatima alayhi salam angry with? Sayyidat Nisa'il Alameen. Again, I refer back to a hadith from the books of the Mukhalifin, from the books of the Amma. Refer back to Sahih al-Bukhari, Kitab al-Maghazi, hadith number 3913 for the Egyptian edition that we have. Narration is narrated, the incident which is narrated in Sahih Bukhari, Kitab al-Maghazi. This incident is narrated by Aisha. And the hadith talks about, or the incident talks about, the narration talks about the narrative from Aisha of how Sayyidat Nisa'il Alameen went and sought her inheritance in the land of Fadak from Abu Bakr. And for his reasons, he rejected the inheritance of Sayyidat Nisa'il Alameen. And into Hadith al-Sharif is found in both the Arabic and the English versions of Bukhari. So you can look this up. Kitab al-Maghazi. Hadith al-Sharif says, فَأَبَى أَبُو بَكْرٍ أَن يَدْفَعْ إِلَى فَاطِمَةَ مِنْهَا شَيْئًا. For Abu Bakr refused to give anything to Fatima from her inheritance. فَوَجَدَتْ فَاطِمَةَ عَلَى أَبِي بَكْرٍ. فَوَجَدَتْ فَاطِمَةَ. وَجَدَتْ يعني from the verb وَجَدَ. One of the meanings of the word wajada, if you were to refer back to one of the most famous and well-used Arabic lexicons by the name of Lisanul Arab, you will find that the word wajada in essence means ghadaba, angered. فَوَجَدَتْ فَاطِمَةَ عَلَى أَبِي بَكْرَ. Fatima was angry with him في ذلك, over this incident. Fatima was angry with him. فَهَجَرَتْهُ. So she decided to ignore him and not speak to him. فَلَمْ تُكَلِّمْهُ حَتَّى تُوفِّيَتْ. She was angered with him to such an extent. She refused to speak with him. فَهَجَرَتْهُ. In essence, refused to even acknowledge his existence. فَلَمْ تُكَلِّمْهُ. And she did not speak to him until she died. فَهِيَ you have in Sahih al-Bukhari, narrated by Aisha, that Sayyidat Nisa al-Alameen was angry with this individual. And you know from the Quran that the one upon whom Fatima is angry, alayha salam, Allah is angry with them. And you also know that the person who angers Fatima from the Quran, upon him is Jahannam wa bi'sal masir. And you know that upon whom Fatima is angry cannot be a representation of truth. Rather, he is astray. But what does this mean for you and I? You know the consequences of the anger of Allah, and the anger of Fatima is the anger of Allah. And you also know who Fatima alayha salam was angry with. What are the consequences of this? Ahibba'i, refer back to the Quran. And over here we are referring back to Suratul Mumtahana. Suratul Mumtahana, verse number 13. يا بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم يا أيها الذين آمنوا لا تتولوا قوما غضب الله عليهم. O you who believe, يا أيها الذين آمنوا, O you who have iman, O you who recite the Shahada La ilaha illallah, those of you who believe, يا أيها الذين آمنوا لا تتولوا قوما غضب الله عليهم. Do not befriend, do not accept the authority of those upon whom the anger of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has descended upon. O you who believe and have iman, do not submit, do not acknowledge the authority of those upon whom the anger of Fatima has fallen upon, because the anger of Fatima is the anger of Allah Azza wa Jalla. This is a grave matter, huh? Understand the gravity of seeking the anger of Sayeda Fatima al-Zahra and the verdict of the Quran for us to abide by in regards to those who sought the anger of Sayeda Fatima al-Zahra. But if we don't believe in the Quran and we don't believe in the Hadith, هذا شيء آخر. This is something else. Kalam is kalam for those who believe in the Quran and in the Hadith. When Sayeda Fatima al-Zahra said in Masjid al-Nabawi, "I'lamu anni Fatima know that I am Fatima. Understand the reasons why she said this. Her anger is the anger of Allah Azza wa Jal. Sayeda Fatima al-Zahra alayha salam, as is mentioned in Kitab Sulaym bin Kays al-Hilali, sought assistance, sought help from the Ansar and the Muhajirin. She asked the companions and the residents of Medina to stand up and to support her in seeking her rightful claim. This claim, which is a representation of the wilayah of Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam. She sought help from the Ansar and the Muhajirin, such that the hadith narrates for 3 nights, her and the Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam would go to the houses of the Ansar and the Muhajirin, reminding them of their covenant towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in regards to the wilayah of Amir al-Mu'mineen. And she sought assistance from them for them to stand up so the rights of Ahlul Bayt can be restored back. No one but 5 people stood up for Amir al-Mu'mineen and stood up for Sayeda Fatima al-Zahra. And the others abandoned Sayeda Fatima for a number of reasons. Some of them because their loyalty was somewhere else. There are others who made a calculated decision. Pay attention to these words, because history repeats itself. There are those who made calculated decisions. And so where is the maslihat of my dunya? In the camp of Saqifa or in the camp of Sayeda Fatima? They saw that the maslihah of their dunya is that they should be with the camp of Saqifa. So they abandoned Sayeda Fatima alayha salam. There are those who were indifferent, number 3. Number 4, there were those who came to Sayeda Fatima alayha salam and they said, we sympathize with you and we know that the truth is there with you, but we cannot stand up for you. The madlumiyat of Sayeda Fatima al-Zahra echoes in every day and in every age. And it is upon us to ask ourselves from the bottom of our hearts, which side of the spectrum we lie on when it comes to our wilayah to Sayeda Fatima al-Zahra alayha salam. Tatimmatul hadith. Completion of the hadith, inshaAllah, in the majlis for tomorrow night. Ahibai, the tragedy that befell upon Ahlul Bayt and the tragedy that befell upon Imam al-Hussein and the family of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam on the day of Ashura. The root of all this oppression lies with the people of Saqifa when they attacked Sayeda Fatima al-Zahra. الذين أسسوا أساس الظلم والجور عليكم أهل البيت. The doors of oppression opened upon Ahlul Bayt through the oppression of Sayeda Fatima al-Zahra. And tonight, Ahibai, I want to take your hearts between the unknown grave of Sayeda Fatima al-Zahra in Medina al-Munawwara. And from Medina al-Munawwara, I want to take your hearts to Karbala al-Muqaddas. Allah. From the night of the burning door to Sham Ghariban. The narrations mention that on the evening of Ashura, towards the time after Salatul Asr, when the enemies had surrounded Aba Abdullah on the plains of Karbala. Here is the body of Aba Abdullah al-Hussein, trampled by horses. The narrations mention that Umar ibn Sa'ad called out for horsemen to trample upon the body of Aba Abdullah. A few meters away, his head was launched on a spear with Shimr ibn Dhiljoshan al-La'in dancing around the enemies, dancing around in his camp as they celebrated, and the head of Imam al-Hussein raised on a spear. Sayyida Zainab al-Kubra weeping and wailing at looking at the head of Imam al-Hussein. On the other hand, the headless body of Aba Abdullah, Umar ibn Sa'ad called out and said, trample the body of Aba Abdullah. So they called for horsemen using horses that were not used during the entire battle. They asked Umar ibn Sa'ad why. He said, bring me the freshest of horses so they can trample the body of Aba Abdullah with the maximum of force. So they trampled over the body of Imam al-Hussein. Wa wayla ya Shi'at al Muhammad. This is the body of Aba Abdullah, broken and crushed into pieces underneath the hooves of the horses. As they trampled on the body of Imam al-Hussein, the enemies then turned their focus towards the tents of Al Muhammad, the women and the children who have just seen the massacre of their men. The enemies approached towards the tents of Ali Muhammad and they lit them on fire. Allah, Allah. As the tents were lit on fire, the women and the children began to run out in every direction. Allah, Allah. As the women and the children ran out, one of the daughters of Aba Abdullah, the daughters of Aba Abdullah today, Masa'ib of Sayyidah Ruqayya and her grandmother Sayeda Fatima al-Zahra. Shame Ghariban, the narration mentions that Sayyidah Ruqayya, together with the remaining women and children, ran out from the khaymaga. The tent was on fire. The flames and the heat with the black smoke, the young girl was not able to see, and this daughter of Imam al-Hussein was choking with the black smoke. So she ran into the Maidan. At this moment, Khuli, one of the enemies of Allah, La'natullahi alayh, Khuli got a hold of Sayyidah Ruqayya. The Maktal narrates that he took her by the hand and he slapped her across the face. He slapped Sayyidah Ruqayya in a manner that the 3-year-old daughter of Imam al-Hussein fell face first on the plains of Karbala. Which is why the alim says, when Khuli slapped Sayyidah Ruqayya, Sayyidah Zainab from the burning tent came running and she cried out, Ya Zahra, oh my mother, oh Fatima, in the manner that Ibn Sahak came into the house of Fatima. The narrations mention that as Sayyidah Fatima Zahra Zahra was crushed between the door and the wall. He slapped Sayeda Fatima Zahra in a manner so hard. Her face and her cheek was bruised until the end of her life. Over here, Allah, Allah, in the manner that Zahra was slapped. Here, years later in Karbala, the daughters of Zahra are being slapped. The narration mentions that Khuli did not stop with this. The little child Sayyidah Ruqayya stood up crying out looking for her auntie Zainab. My heart tells me Ruqayya cried out, where is my uncle Abbas? At this moment, the historians mention that Khuli saw the earrings on the ears of Sayyidah Ruqayya. So he reached out and he pulled the earrings of the young girl, tearing up the earlobes of the daughter of Abu Abdullah. The ears of Sayyidah Ruqayya were bleeding and she sat on the plains of Karbala weeping and crying. Sayyidah Zainab says, oh man, if only you had asked, the girl would give you without you ripping her earlobes. Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. Wala hawla wala quwwata illa billah. Allahumma inna nas'aluka bihaqqi Sayyida Fatima az-Zahra. Allahumma ajjil li waliyina al-faraj. وبحق سيدة فاطمة الزهراء اللهم اغفر لنا ذنوبنا وارحم موتانا اللهم اشفي مرضانا وارحم موتانا وبحق سيدة فاطمة الزهراء اللهم ثبت أقدامنا. Ya Allah, by the Sheikh of Sayyidah Fatima al-Zahra, hasten the reappearance of Imam al-Hujjah. By the Sheikh of Sayyidah Fatima al-Zahra, Ya Allah, all those who are not in the best of health, you grant them shafa'ah in the fastest of times. All our marhumin and marhumat who have passed away, Ya Allah, you grant them mercy and elevate their status and make their graves into a garden from the gardens of Jannah. By the Shaykh of Sayyidah Fatima al-Zahra, Ya Allah, forgive us our sins and keep us on the right path and inspire us and our children and our progenies and our lineage to be on the right path, to be fearless servants of Sayyidah Fatima al-Zahra. Ya Allah, do not deny us the shafa'ah of Sayyidah Fatima al-Zahra in the akhirah. وآخر دعوانا أن الحمد لله رب العالمين. يقول الله تعالى إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجه. ماتم حسين ماتم فاطمة.